Hey, what's up YouTube? So today I'm going to be bringing you the League Starter video. I get a lot of questions in chat regarding how do I actually level as a Scion and immediately transition to Aura Stacker. The main problem is that you actually cannot be an Aura Stacker at League Start, but you can play a build that will allow you to transition smoothly to an Aura Stacker. Now the reason is you can like approach this a certain number of ways. So regardless, you will need a certain amount of gear, and you need all of the pieces before swapping. A lot of people try to swap too soon to Aura Stacker and end up playing a build that's not optimized at all because Aura Stacker is a build that requires a lot of parts altogether to synergize well, to work correctly because your resists are your offense with the Nebulous. Now, because of this, it's also very important for the Scion to be high level, and you should really not be swapping until you're like low to mid 90s at a bare minimum. So you pretty much want to play a different build that is cheap and relatively affordable at the start, and preferably a Scion, and that will allow you to farm up all the gear and then swap immediately all at once at like low to mid 90s. Now, a lot of how long it will take to farm up all the gear is how lucky you get with league drops. Like if you get like an Exalt or a Mirror or a Awaken Multi Strike or something, then your timeline is going to be a lot faster. Now, the big problem with Scion is that Scions are just notoriously bad to level a league start, and this is where I'll come in to help. I'll provide you some build and options that you can do as a Scion. And of course, you can always play another build that's not a Scion if you wanted to level or re-level. But I feel like the time you lose at league start is pretty massive, like losing a full day to re-leveling to 95 or something like that. Now I'm gonna go over the first option, and the first option is also the best option. But the problem with this option is that it actually requires having friends to play with at the league start, because the first option is to be an Aura bot. Now, Aura bot shares a lot of the same gear as an Aura stacker, and I can show you this POB right here. And this is the POB that if you're going to play an Aura bot, this is a pretty good build generally to follow. And you have Prism Guardian, which is the shield we use, Alpha's House, Shavs, or you can use Victario's chest. And then you just have an ES pair of gloves, Sintrek, and then you have Presence of Cheula for stun immunity, and then you just have rings instead of Call of the Brotherhoods with some ES and resist and some stats on it, a String of Servitude, or you can use Beta Breath or another belt. Just regular defensive flask, Quicksilver, and I think this person uses Soul Catcher because you can get a shorter duration on your or shorter soul game prevention duration on your Vol Haste or Vol Grace, which is pretty big. And now, if you look at the cluster jewels these people have, is voices, and they have first among replenishing, first among replenishing, first among replenishing, and this is exactly what we need. And then they also use small cluster jewels for wick energy from Not, which gives them more ES. And this is another voices. You don't exactly need to use a voices. You can use a large cluster jewel with Vengeful Commander, and it will be just as good. And you also have more first among replenishings just all around. Basic ES tree, taking all of the mana reservation and aura effect nodes. And some stats here and there. So this tree is literally identical. It even has Zealot's Oath already. And you can see the items are mostly all the same. It even gets Might of the Meek, Intuitive Leap. And yeah. So basically, in order to level this build, you will pretty much be tagging along with your friend from the start. So you can maybe use your own skill to level up with a little bit. But once you get EE, you can choose a skill to apply EE, and you should already be giving more damage than if your friend was solo. Then once you start running auras and you have some curses that you can do, then your friend will probably be begging you to actually level with them. And what skill you will use and what auras you will run. I know like this reservation is kind of messed up, but this is just like some baseline auras. And you'll have to choose depending on what skill your friend is using and whether he's using a spell or an attack skill and what element type it is. Now, another thing that's of importance is that you will probably want to transition when you're like mid 90s. You'll have to save up some extra gear, so you'll need like Call of the Brotherhoods again for the ring and a Nebulous for your weapon instead of this weapon. And this playing this build will also teach you how to smite, and it'll be pretty important. And most importantly, you should convince your friend that you will need all the currency, and this will allow you to get all your gear set faster. Because for Orbot and the carry actually does not need much gear, and all of the damage comes from the Orbot. So convince your friend to give you all the currency, buy up all the gear, save up some gear on the side in your stash, and hide it away, and then ditch your carry, and you'll be ready to be an Aura Stacker in no time. And this is by far the best way, but it requires you having to hire a friend to play with. Now you might be wondering, what if I don't have a friend or I just don't like playing Aurabot? Because not everyone likes playing Aurabot. It's kind of annoying having to depend on someone to always be on, and you might have bad ping because you're playing with someone. Well, Scion is a pretty like bad ascendancy overall in terms of like early game progression, and it's pretty hard to find a build. But I was able to find the best build, I think, that had a mixture of tankiness and damage, and enough damage to do all the end game comfortably. And I wanted the build to be relatively affordable too at the same time, because the items are expensive, and the less amount of currency you spend on your current build, then the more you can spend on buying the items that will get expensive on an Aura Stacker. It's a huge deal. Now the build I settled on was Bladefall, Bladeblast, but with Archmage. Now this build will not get nerfed that much because most of its damage is lightning instead of physical damage, as you can see from the tooltip here. And most of the nerf to Bladeblast was actually to the physical damage component. Like if you use the level 1 Bladeblast gem versus level 21, it's a minuscule difference in terms of damage. And the only damage you actually lose is the damage effectiveness nerf from 60% to 50%. Now, in the rest of this video, I will go over like the mechanics of the skill, how to level it up, and how good the build was actually in mapping. Maybe I'll showcase like Uber Elder and talk about the important actual uniques that you should buy, and gem links, and the defenses of the build, cluster jewels, and how budget the build is, and I'll show you how to play it. Now, I know everyone has heard of like Bladefall, Bladeblast. It's a very common leveling skill, or just like end game skill. But I can go over how it works real fast. So basically, you use Bladefall, you put a lot of blades on the ground, and you see all these blades, and then you detonate it with Bladeblast. So the importance is, this is unleashed right now. The importance is to have the blades as concentrated as possible, so when you detonate it, it has a lot of overlap AoE. So ideally, you want Bladeblast to have as large of an area as possible, but Bladefall, the things that put it down, to have a small radius so that it's all stacked up. So it leads to this weird like dichotomy where you want area on your Bladeblast, but you don't want area on your Bladefall, and that's why this area is like conked. And yeah, that's basically the mechanics of the skill. So the gameplay loop is you just go like this, and then you blow it up, and then you run around. Now you might be wondering, how do I actually level up this build? Because it's kind of, you can't really level as Bladefall, Bladeblast at the start with Archmage. And Scion is a notoriously weak leveling build, but I included a leveling tree here. And you will probably want to be using Orb of Storm, Stormblast Mines, and Frostbomb. I mean, this is a traditional racing build. You want to have Frostbomb linked to Onslaught at the beginning, and then pretty much just cast Stormblast Mines when you're inside of your Orb of Storms. And this should be able to take you all the way to 28. So you go out this way, rush Elemental Overload as soon as possible, get Dark Arts, or get these, Arcanist Dominion. Or you can go down this way and get AoE. Like once you get out of this Scion area at the start, it's a lot better. So the first like 12 levels, the first act is going to be really painful, as you can see that most of these nodes are all mana nodes. So you want to rush to Elemental Overload as soon as possible. It's a 40% more damage multiplier. And once you get Heralds after you do Act 2 Chamber, it is a lot smoother. But the first 12 levels or so, I have to stress, are really painful, and you should not give up. Now, when you get to level 28, you can swap over to Armageddon brand, and the links you use, I would probably use like Armageddon brand, Control Destruction, Elemental Focus, or Combustion, or something at the start. I don't think you can get Swift brand right away. It's a level 31 skill. Archmage is a level 38 skill, and you don't want to use Lightning Pen until you have Archmage, because you do know lightning damage. And then at the same time, you also want to pick up Cremation, and Cremation will also be like Cremation, Control Destruction, Elemental Focus. And you also want to have a Desecrate and Spell Cascade so that you can summon corpses for your cremation. Now that whole lovely setup is super powerful, and it should be able to bring you all the way to end game, or like not end game, but finishing up the campaign. And make sure to have a Bladeblast gem that you're leveling up, and buy a Bladefall. And overall, like when you swap over to Bladefall, Bladeblast is when you want to do it. You can do it after the campaign ends because what's it called? Archmage with Cremation and Armageddon Brand is really that strong, and I think Armageddon Brand probably levels faster than Bladefall Bladeblast through the campaign. But you should definitely swap before going over the maps. And in order to swap, you pretty much just have the main link of Armageddon Brand become the Bladeblast, and then you have the Desecrate, what you were doing with, to become the Bladefall. And I'll go over the gem links later on. Now, overall, this build was a joy to map with, honestly. Like, its strength, surprisingly, is actually mapping rather than boss damage. But its boss damage is still very good once you figure out how the build works. So I can go over some of my budget gear. Now, all this gear was used, and I was able to kill Uber Elder with it. I did it once deathless, actually, after I forgot to spec Mom. I spec'd into it, and let's just say it made a world of difference having Mind Over Matter when you're Mind Over Matter build. So you can see this wand is just some garbage wand. So it just has, so all you want is flat mana and spell damage and some cast speed. Now this wand has trigger. So hopefully they make it next league so that you can get trigger very, very, very early on with the nerfs to betrayal and how many you have to find to unveil something. But again, you can see this is a mana and spell damage wand. Now the helm is a crown of the inward eye, and this helm is actually extremely important. Like this helm will literally double your damage. So Bladeblast damage 23k, you put this helm on 41k. Not quite double, but so this will be one of the first upgrades I buy, and it's definitely worth it. And even though this item will devalue in price, the amount of clear speed you gain from getting this helmet is absolutely crazy. So I definitely pick up this helm as soon as possible. Same thing with Aziri's Foible. Super easy item to get, relatively cheap at the league start, and it will help you out a lot. Essence Swarm is another one. Another easy to get item that gives you a lot of damage and should be pretty not too hard to obtain. And I'm using a regular 6-link chest. It's just a Carno armor. It's not really rolled that well. I think I crafted on chance to avoid being stunned because I was trying to get stun immunity, but you could probably get stun immunity, but it's not the end of the world if you don't have it either. But it's just a regular 6-link chest. You could probably buy it pretty cheap early on. And this is just a life and mana ring with some res and cast speed, and a rare belt with some life and res and crafted flat mana. This is literally a life and double res gloves. You probably want mana on them, so you pretty much want flat mana on all your pieces if possible. And this is just a life, flat mana, 30 move speed, and crafted res. Then for flasks, I have Alchemist Quicksilver Adrenaline, Enduring Internal Mana Flask, Astonishing, I guess Perpetual Granite Flask of Warding. That's what I would use instead of Astonishing. I just didn't roll it because I was lazy. I have a Perpetual Quartz Flask of Heat and a Silver Flask of Grounding. Now these flasks are probably, you could find a better setup than this, but I just use this as a super budget option to simulate like what I would have. 6-link is also not the most mandatory thing to get early on because you probably just not use Lightning Pen, but you don't really need Lightning Pen until you start doing some bossing or some harder bosses with more resist. And basically all this gear is all super cheap, and that's the whole goal of the build, is to use cheap gear to kill bosses so you can save the gear to buy the Aura Stacker items that are actually expensive. And you can see that all the items, the most expensive item is probably either the 6-link chest or the helm. You can see the helm being quite costly at the start, but it is definitely worth it. You can also make an argument to get Cloak of Defiance, because Cloak of Defiance, this is always really good to buy unique items in this build, because uniques sell really easily, and the price is very well known. So if you get a 6-link Cloak of Defiance or even a 5-link one, you could easily resell it and use it to immediately buy a new piece of Aura Stacker gear. So I also look into a cloak if you wanted to, and I think these wands were really bad, and you can definitely find better ones early on. Now I wanted to go over the gem links real fast. So let's see what we have here for gem links. So the chest piece, we have Intensify, Elemental Focus, Control Destruction, Archmage, Bladeblast, Lightning Pen. So this is our main damage skill. And now we also have Bladefall. So this is the Bladefall we use. So this is the thing we use to trigger the Bladeblast. So we have Bladefall, Unleash, Spell Cascade, and Conk Effect. Conk Effect is actually pretty important because it makes all the blades very centered or like clustered together so that your single target will be a lot better. I actually did a lot of testing without Conk Effect, and let's say it was a disaster or it was a huge difference. And here you'll want Arcane Cloak, Second Wind, Arcane Surge, and Sigil of Power. I just couldn't get the colors right, but it's right in the POB that I have. Actually, let me just look at the POB instead. Yeah, so the gloves, you would have Clarity, Vitality, Righteous Fire, Blood Rage. I'm not really sure how much you need to run Vitality. Actually, it depends on Agnostic. But I just ran it because I have so much mana left over. And then you have Wrath in the Ring. And then for the wand, you have Flame Dash, Smoke Mine, Second Wind. And this is our movement skill that allows us to travel through the map really, really fast. And this is the Bladefall link that I have. And there's also, if you could ever get your hands on a faster casting gloves, then you could put the Bladefall there. But I don't know how likely that is. But if how likely it is to get a gloves like that, so you can get socketed by a level 20 faster casting, and that would make the build probably feel a lot smoother. So here you have Arcane Cloak, high level Arcane Surge, Second Wind, Sigil of Power. And on the weapon for trigger, we have Conductivity, so it puts this curse on and makes them have negative resistance. Wave of Conviction for extra exposure resistance. I guess this is quite nerfed because this is only 15% in the new league. And then you have Summon Lightning Golem, so that you always have the Lightning Golem up. And then I'm manually casting Righteous Fire on my gloves. And that's about it for the gem links. So it's a lot of different gem links that you'll actually have a lot of skills to use that you'll actively be pressing. And that's actually kind of why the build is kind of fun but annoying to play at the same time. Now I wanted to go over the pretty much the tree and like the basic philosophy behind it and why I chose what I did. So the tree starts off from here and it goes all around. So pretty much you're trying to get all of the mana nodes. You get agnostic, which gives you an insane amount of regen when you're not on life. And this actually allows us to be able to sustain RF. You get mind over matter, so your mana pool is part of your life. You have elemental overload since you're not crit. Theoretically, it is possible to go crit late game, but it's probably more investment than I would like. And this node is important because it gives you extra unleash seal, which means that when you cast Bladefall, there will be a lot more blades on the ground to detonate, and this lets you gain seals faster. Then I went over here to get Arcane Capacitor for some extra mana and effective Arcane Surge. Over here is the thing I anointed, which gives you recover 2% of mana on kill, which is really good for mapping. And now I went down here for Heart Evoke for some stun immunity. And I think you can get stun immunity if you crafted like stun on your chest piece and on your gloves or helm. Actually, you probably wouldn't have a helm, so just the gloves and chest with this should probably maybe be enough and make the game feel a lot better, especially with the Pantheon of Soul, the Brine King. And there's some more Mana Flask nodes, Mana Flask nodes. Now this is a layer of defense I like, is using Wind Dancer, so this makes you take less damage if you haven't been hit recently. And since we're using aggro and phase aggro, our chances to be hit are actually quite low. So once you combine all these defenses of aggro, phase aggro, along with mom and agnostic regen, the build is actually quite tanky. Like if you look at the calcs for the EHP of the build, it's like pretty high. I mean, this is with negative 48% chaos res and not even capped res because I have bad gear. And yeah, you can see the EHP pool is actually insanely high for this build. And that's partly the reason why I chose this version over Miner or something, because I know Miners are nowhere near as tanky and their effective HP pool is nowhere near as high. So this is basically the whole tree. I feel like this is the most optimal route in terms of combining the defenses of Wind Dancer and Phase Aggro along with the damage of having all these mana nodes. Now I wanted to go into the Ascendancy choice I made for this character because we're an Ascendant, so we actually have a lot of choices to make. So this build is actually kind of a flask build in a sense, since we will always have this one flask enduring mana flask up during boss fights, and this is how we recover our mana consistently. so it recovers relatively fast. And we choose Pathfinder, so this thing is flask gains 3 charges every 3 seconds, so we're pretty much gaining charges for our mana flask to give us full uptime. And it also gives us recover life when we use a flask and 15 chance for flask not to consume charges, and move speed and attack speed. So overall, this ascendancy is necessary because otherwise we would not regenerate flasks in boss fights and we wouldn't have mana, because our main source of mana regen is actually our enduring eternal mana flask of staunching. Now the other portion of it is Hierophant. Hierophant just gives us an extra amount of defense because it's 8% of damage is taken from mana before life, so it's like an extra mom a little bit. And it also gives us 25% increased mana, which is pretty much just damage for us, and it also grants us Arcane Surge and 25% increased effect of Arcane Surge on you. And this is actually pretty nice, and I really like this setup. And I think these are pretty much mandatory choices. Like originally I tried to test out Necro to use the trigger with Bone Offering, but it did not seem worth it compared to Pathfinder, because you pretty much just need the mana from your flask. You pretty much need the flask to be up constantly, otherwise fights like Cyrus, you'll eventually run out of flask and you'll just be screwed. Now this is another build that kind of used cluster jewels. So for like cluster jewels for large cluster, I just went with something really cheap. So I had Scintillating Idea, which gives me some Lightning Pen, and then Storm Drinker, which is some more Lightning Pen. This is probably relatively cheap at the start. And then medium cluster, I have Distill Perfection, Liquid Inspiration. I know this thing is kind of expensive, but the thing is that this thing can be relatively easily rolled. You see how Distill Perfection has a life tag, so you can just reforge this Flask Effect Duration jewel with life, and you probably get this sooner or later relatively fast. And yeah, so these things just give you increased mana recovery from the flask and more mana recovery and percent mana. And then this one here, Liquid Inspiration, again is percent mana. Now this one's probably easier to do because you can do reroll of caster more likely, or reroll speed, or reroll attack. And Spiked Concoction gives us Alchemist Genius, which gives us our increased effect of flasks and more flash charges gained. Overall, this build is kind of like a flask build. You'll have a lot of flasks up all the time, even if you spam it and don't press it like at the most optimal interval. So this build is actually kind of bad for Carpal Tunnel, I guess. And now for the small cluster jewels, we use these percent mana ones and more Liquid Inspiration. This jewel is on it. This notable is actually really good. Percent mana and increased mana recovery from flash is definitely something that we want. And yeah, I have a better trading PoE link for you guys that I'll be able to be using. So if you go here, you go to trade, search items. I made all these items: Aziris, boots, large cluster, medium cluster, one-handed weapon, ring, crown to inward eye. And I'll show you how to, and I'll share the link, and then you can just have these items up. You click this and it immediately does a search for you for essence form. This is how you can buy items super cheap at the start of a league with this better trading add-on for Chrome extension. Now I was able to pretty much do every single content in the game with this gear. Like I was here is like pretty much a Deathless Uber Elder that I did. I died once on it at the end here, and pretty much this build is very, very strong single target wise for the amount of money I put in, and its clear is actually surprisingly good. Like here you can saw that I could tank a slam because I dodged it with phase acro and I got lucky. And this gear I have is honestly really bad for Uber Elder. Now Uber Elder is a kind of a mechanical fight, so I don't know if it's exactly the best demonstration of a build's capability. But yeah, the build is definitely really good for Boston. You can definitely probably do all the content. Maybe Feared might be a little hard, but in terms of like the Elder Guardian invitations and the Breach Guardian invitations, it was a breeze. It also feels really tanky. Like here I died to a ball, but usually you can tank a ball and live. And most of the Shaper Guardians will be easy. The only thing I can imagine it kind of being hard, even Maven is actually really good for this build. Like Maven is a fight that requires a lot of regen because of degen pools on the ground, and this build's regen and life regen recovery rate is absolutely crazy, and this is with RF on. Yeah, so I killed this guy with pretty much the same exact gear as you'll see in the POB, and it was also very tanky, and I could live for quite a while standing in a bunch of stuff or getting hit by a lot of stuff or dodging the stuff at the same time because of acro and phase acro. Now I wanted to go over the playstyle of the build because there's some stuff that's actually really important that will actually make or break your damage. So the way that Arcane Cloak and Sigil of Power work is that these things are super crazy important for maximizing your damage in bosses. So you can kind of think of this build as having like DPS uptime cycles for bossing. So at the start of the match, you turn on your RF, you should turn on your blood rate so you can get some power frenzy charges as you clear the map. And now the important part is once you reach the boss, you want to place Sigil of Power down, and then you want to make sure your mana is completely full and you press Arcane Cloak. Now this will give you a buff that gives you lightning damage based on how much mana you spent. So you can see here, I don't know if you can see at the bottom, buff grants added lightning damage equal to 14% of mana spent by the skill effect. So I'll place Sigil of Power, and then placing the Arcane Cloak gives you extra lightning damage. So you can see the tooltip went up to 142k. Now when you're not in this thing, your tooltip is at 56k, so you can see how big of a damage boost it is. Also, Sigil of Power makes you do more and more damage if you stand in it, and it goes up to the maximum amount of stages depending on how much mana you use. So that's why this tooltip goes up so high. So when you're bossing, you should be running around. You should be waiting until Arcane Cloak and Sigil of Power is up. You place both down at the same time, and then you start casting your Bladefall, Bladeblast, and your damage that you deal will be much more significant. Then once you see that Arcane Cloak is back on cooldown, you can run around again, put down Sigil of Power, Arcane Cloak, and then start casting Bladefall, Bladeblast. So that's what people mean by like this build is not exactly the most beginner friendly build in terms of like a one button play style, because like any build where your damage will become like mediocre or bad if you mess up a rotation or something, or you cast skills in a bad order, is just probably not like the best skill ever for bossing if you don't know the boss mechanics, because the last thing you want to be focusing on is like looking at like 10 different buffs.
Can I not have but a moment's respite?
The damage is definitely worth it. Like there's a reason why builds like this do so much damage for low gear investment, is because it's like taking advantage of some stacking thing or some just like some mechanic that makes it more unenjoyable to play, kind of like how slams are good because you have to stack your cries, and I think GGG really likes that, where you have more damage for having to do a rotation or paying more attention. But the playstyle is not that bad. Most of the time in mapping, you'll never be casting Sigil of Power, and you'll only be casting like Arcane Cloak on cooldown. Some really lazy people for mapping, you can also put Arcane Cloak on your left click, so you're pretty much just always casting it as you're mapping. And then while bossing, your flasks will come up all the time, so just keep using the flasks, make sure they're all up. I actually had a lot of issue with using Alchemist Adrenaline because my character was just too fast. And a lot of times when I did Uber Elder, I just ran into some balls. And here's the build in a T16 map. It's actually pretty fast. It's not too bad at all. Like I can definitely play this build the whole time and not really be like crying about the clear speed or bossing that badly. And this is before I actually put I was using an Unleash seal node on the tree. I didn't know how good it actually was because I actually never played Bladefall, Bladeblast, so it's quite a learning experience. And I hope watching this video helps you out and like learning the steps that I had to do, and I wish that some people told me about this before I actually embarked on this journey. But anyhow, let's go see about the important stuff, which is our actual Aura Stacker and what we actually need to buy in order to, what's it called, in order to be able to transition to it as soon as possible. So where is it? 3.14 Scuffed Aura Stacker start. So this is the gear I had last league. I had it on like day 3 or 4. Probably could have had it sooner, but I was at a party. Now you can see the gear. Some of this stuff, I don't know if you can be guaranteed to have a Bottle of Faith. This is probably an item that's too expensive. So before you want to swap, you want to make sure you have every single one of these pieces of gear. So this is actually using a Hands of the High Templar. I just wanted to illustrate how you can get some cheap clustered, cheap multi-jewels of RMR. I had a lot of double multi-jewels because last league, these double multi-RMR jewels were literally like 50 chaos at the start or cheaper, and I knew they would go up in price. However, you can lower the cost of the build a lot more by using Malagaros, and then all your Cobalt jewels or whatever, you can just get ES RMR or even any just generic damage RMR. or cast speed RMR, because cast speed actually makes the build feel a lot better. And yeah, I can go over the gear. It's Nebulous, Prism Guardian, Alpha Sal, all extremely affordable items. Nebulous might be a little more expensive towards the start of the league. Now Shavs, you can get a 6 link or 5 link. I would probably wait until getting a 6 link before swapping, and you should have enough currency by then to buy a 6 link. Now you could go over hands on a High Templar route if you can find a lot of cheap, or you snipe up a lot of cheap RMR multi-jewels. And you could probably set a search parameter. I'll include a search parameter for a good hands of the High Templar. So what we're looking for is like duration, AoE, aura gems for the smite, and a spell crit preferably, or LE weakness. Now these boots are Doriani's Delusion. They're super cheap and affordable. So you use these to get a level 25 purity, so you can save a gem socket. Now this amulet doesn't even have an aura on it. It's just a 6% RMR amulet with some multi and spell damage and crafted percent ES, so it's super affordable. And be sure to get Champion of the Cause anointed. And Call of the Brotherhoods, make sure to use your catalyst to make it 48%. I cannot stress this enough. And Beta Breath, this is such a cheap item. You could probably also use like a Crystal Belt with some Chaos Res, depending on whether you want to be tankier. And I had like Silver Flask. I couldn't afford Cinder Swallow Urn actually still, so I guess you can use a Cinder Swallow Urn, a Diamond Flask. You probably wouldn't want a Bottle Faith, or you do want a Bottle Faith, but I think that might be very high budget depending on how many people do Cortex and how big the nerf to the Zana Cortex actually was. You'll use like Aziri's Promise and Quicksilver Flask of Adrenaline. And then the Watcher's Eye, I had a Hatred Crit one, and that's like the only mod on it. The medium cluster jewels are just a bunch of first amount replenishings. And this is with the nerf. Now the big difference here is you see how the resist is 88%, and this is because of the nerf to aura effectiveness from the first amount replenishing. So now we're forced to use Blood Magic Gem with our purities, so you want to switch over your purities to here, Fire and Ice. But the problem is if you use this pair of boots, then you wouldn't have the Arrogance Gem in, so you wouldn't have 90% lighting res, which is not good. So you might want to use Sintrek instead of these pair of boots, or a rare pair of boots. It depends on how much aura effects you end up having though. And yeah, so first amount replenishing, first amount replenishing, first amount replenishing, first amount replenishing, Purposeful Harbinger replenishing, first among, and first among replenishing. I'm actually missing a Purposeful Harbinger jewel. So you probably want two Purposeful Harbingers instead of just one, or you should have two. You can see my build was super scuffed because I was still using stats. Eventually, when you get a Headhunter, then you don't need to worry about the stats as much, or you use a different type of amulet with stats. And this build is using Arc. Arc is the best skill to use at the start because you don't need to use a 50% Malevolence aura. And Arc also has really good base damage and a built-in multiplier for single target. And lastly, Vol Arc was actually buffed massively for mapping, so you'll have Vol Arc and your lucky critical strike chance up a lot more. And this build is, so basically you want to save up every single piece of gear and then swap over. You can like probably get away with like some pieces missing, but you need pretty much all the jewels. And oh yeah, I want to talk about large clusters real fast. So large clusters, you just use any good notable ones. I'm using Essence Rush for the Leech, Practice Caster for the stun immunity and spell damage and cast speed. And I have one voices, and then Storm Rider to get some power charges, and Prismatic Heart. So you can see I'm using very budget large clusters. So you don't need the perfect setup, but you need to have all the items. So that's the most important takeaway, I think. So basically, League Start any of the builds that I showed you earlier, whether it's an Aura bot, the Bladefall, Bladeblast, Archmage, or even another build completely that you find that you like that's not a Scion if you want to restart and relevel. And once you get all of that sorted with your gear for your main build or your League Starter build, then you can start dumping all the currency into buying these items. And I can tell you what items you should buy, and that's not going to be worth it. Like Nebulous is something that will devalue. Items that will go up in price a lot are like Intuitive Leap with RMR, Conqueror's Efficiency with RMR, Might of the Meek Jewel with RMR will go up a lot. I don't even use Might of the Meek RMR on this build on this POB though. So you can see you can get away with really cheap items, but you just have to make sure you have all the items. I've heard it so many times that people haven't gotten all the items and they try to swap and it doesn't work out. So hopefully this video helps you out. I think the build I made for Scion is probably the best for Scion, with cheap, relatively affordable gear to do all the end game and be able to save money to be an Aura Stacker. Hope the video answer a lot of questions about what I'll be playing and how I'll be approaching it and how I'll be able to transition to Aura Stacker. Now you might be able to transition a lot faster if you get lucky, so I hope everyone playing the League start has lots of luck and finds a mirror and are able to swap on like day 2 or day 3. Anyhow, everyone, thanks for watching and be sure to like and subscribe. I'll be streaming my entire League start on Twitch and you can ask me all the questions you want there. I'll try to help you out if you have questions about the Bladefall Bladeblast build. I actually really enjoyed the build and I think it will be a resounding success, so I hope you follow me and I'll make a build diary every single day, like an update of how it's going. And thanks for watching and I'll see you next time.